Hi, my name is Noordhoek and I'm the founder of EBD Connect. We have it as our mission to unlock the value of event-driven architecture. We think that it should be able to be used by everybody. A lot of people talk about event-driven architecture or event-based development as really being complex. We disagree. We think that event-based development can be simplified and can actually be more broadly embraced by everybody in the market. So in this presentation, I want to talk about supercharging event modeling. How do we think we can do that? By making it outcome-driven and by introducing the concept of context. Before we go there, I will follow my own methodology and not start with an agenda, but actually talk about what I want to achieve with this. So first of all, I hope to convince you to put design center stage again. With all the agile methodologies and all the other things that we're doing nowadays, design has been pushed into a corner. We just have time for it before we start coding, but it doesn't really contain our thoughts from the beginning of our design stage. So what else? I really want to reconsider how you currently implement systems. So I go even further and say, agile is a problem. Agile is actually in the way of how we do things. And I'll explain more later. This is the cliffhanger, but I promise you that I can give you something that will reduce project risk, reduce lead times, get rid of a lot of communication issues with stakeholders, and actually also prevent unknown unknowns. So let's dive into it. And as a start, I'll give you a first introduction in event modeling, because not everybody is familiar. So event modeling is about modeling over time a system state changes caused by events. It's quite a mouthful, but what do I mean with it? It is that I think that modeling events can give us the right picture of how a system morphs over time, how it changes. And we only need events for it. And that's also the concept behind event modeling. It is the brainchild of Adam Dimitruk, and it finds its roots in domain-driven design, CQRS with event sourcing, and concepts like event storming. How do we get the events? So how does it, it's simple. So it only uses a couple of symbols, and also it provides predictability. And I think that's one of the biggest assets of event modeling. It gives us a predictable delivery method. So how does it work? The first step is brainstorming, where we start to identify events. We want to know what has happened. So we start to define events in the past tense. In an example of a hotel booking, we can talk about, oh, the room was booked. But before we can book a room, we need to add a room, or check in a room, check out the room, payments requested, payments received. So we go through the whole journey of identifying what triggers in the business happened to us. And then while we're doing that, we can also already start to identify who is responsible for those events. Yeah? Identify stakeholders. Who owns the event is even more important, because that will show us potential bottlenecks in our processes, because nobody takes ownership. So how do we know that we will get the event? The next step is the plot. We are starting to create a timeline. In which order do these events need to happen so that we can get the triggers in the right order? Yeah, so I can start with booking a room, but if I don't have the room yet, I can't book it. So the first event is adding a room. Then we book the room. Then it would be nice if the room is prepared for us. So we prepare the room as soon as we know that it's been booked and for when. Then we do the check-in, the check-out, and payment. Yeah, so here will be a lot of discussions. In which order are we actually doing things? And we start to identify the flow through the system. And potentially we identify, hey, we're missing events. So we add other stuff. The next step for Adam will be about story telling. Yeah, give people a storyboard, give them prototypes, give them sketches about how we want to capture information, how we're going to interact with the system. But I disagree. I think storytelling is actually in the way of what we're doing. It helps us identify inputs and it helps us identify outputs. But is this the smartest way to do things? Let's put that to the side for a moment and continue with event modeling. So one of the important aspects of event modeling is also that we take into account Conway's law. And Conway's law is all about designing our systems in such a way that they reflect the organizational communication structure. Yeah, we should be able to introduce this system without breaking how we do things. So we start to identify all the events that belong to accounts and all the events that belong to room management. So that means that with development, we could have specialization and have a team work on a specific type of events, call it a microservice. Yeah. So the last step is elaborate on the scenarios. So each of the slices that you see here will have certain business rules. When can a slice create an event? So it could be, given this happens, when we do this command, it should result in this event. Or we only have, given this command, we get this event, and we don't have any specifics beforehand. All right, let's get back to that subject of predictability. Predictability is awesome if you are a software, especially a manager, of course, when we can get the projects running according to plan. So why does event modeling give us predictability? We get predictability because, as you can see, everything breaks up in a slice. And those slices continuously contain the same patterns. It is a query, it is an interface or a processor, it will have a command, and it will have an event. And this keeps repeating and repeating. It even goes as far that Adam says, we don't need sagas. We can actually just work with so-called to-do lists and to-do list processors to solve all our problems. And it means that we model more things out, but it actually all becomes way more simple. So it gives us predictability, except for one aspect. And that aspect is, of course, front-end development. Front-end development is too hard to get predictable. It depends on the complexity of the user interface and more stuff. So I actually want to make the statement that I think UX is preventing us from being customer-centric or customer-focused, because we start talking about making prototypes. We're going to make wireframes. So we start to tell the customer how things are going to look like. We are setting expectations for the customer of what the outcome will be. And we still don't know what we're going to build. So who are we that we're going to predict how things are going to look like and what the flow is going to be of how we input information? How do we get the information at the right point with our frameworks and prototypes? What I'm suggesting is that we're not trying to solve the real problem with UX. The real problem is actually that we have problems translating requirements, or the quality of the requirements are of such a quality that we're actually missing things and that we have loads of unknowns in the system. So my solution to that is outcome-driven knowledge modeling. Let's explain why. So outcome-driven knowledge modeling we first need to know what do we actually mean with an outcome. And to me, outcomes are all about changing the behavior of people. If we don't change the behavior or attitude of people, we don't have any outcomes because people start doing the same thing over and over again. We need to do something better so that they like it and start using it. So only by creating value for customers which cause them to change their behavior, we actually get a project outcome. Yeah, so outcomes are extremely important, and it's all about changing the behavior of people with those outcomes. Another important aspect of working with outcomes from the start is the alignment with the business. Business should, if they've got the right maturity level, also work with outcomes. It starts with a mission. The mission is translated into a vision, which gives us direction to set up a strategy that is based on, if we are successful, we have certain outcomes. And operations only provide outputs that enable us to do outcomes. So in the past, software development has always been focused on outputs. Yeah, we need to make this feature, we need to make that feature. But how do they align with what we actually want as a strategy of the company? So by starting with outcomes and talking about getting the outcome clear, we actually start talking with the business, and more importantly, with the primary stakeholders in the business. How do we use outcome-driven knowledge modeling? We work backwards. This is the solution for solving the requirements, quality, and communication gap. We start with what we know. We know that we want to achieve this outcome. What is the outcome? Let's take the example of converting a trial to a subscription. We can go back and say, what needs to have happened to get this outcome? So we start to enter events. This event needs to have happened so that we get a trial subscription. We provide the information that sits in the event so that we know that we actually can check that we have the KPIs to check that we have that outcome. So that's only one step. Now we've got one event. How does that help us? Well, we've got a bunch of facts here that show us there's information coming from somewhere. Those are actually new events. So if I would select just account and then say, create an event that delivers me that account ID. So now I start to discover, hey, before my subscription started, there was an event that says the payment was successful. And step by step, we can go backwards using the facts in the events to identify what events needed to happen before those events. And in this way, we go back all the way to the beginning, and we have in one go identified all the knowledge that we need. We know that we need that knowledge because otherwise we couldn't get the outcome. And we haven't been retrying and done 10 iterations of design with UX and frameworks to discover those facts. We constantly work with what we know instead of trying to figure out what do we need. In the end, that will give us timelines with events that deliver certain outcomes, certain processes that will give us the outcome. So here we have a complete model that can be understood by the business. We haven't talked a single technical term. So the only hesitation that I have is actually about the word event. I think it's a technical term and I want to get rid of it, but Should we be talking about triggers? Nowadays, that's not that good. So let's keep it at that. But this model represents the knowledge flowing through the organization. And that's where the term knowledge modeling, from my perspective, an event is actually the creation of knowledge. An event happens in a certain context when information enters the system, when the state of the system is being changed. So again, we now have a fully testable system because we can see if all the information has been linked up, and we haven't done any single discovery session except for looking for events and the information inside the events. So I've missed the context concept. Why did I introduce the context? Well, one important aspect is language. We want to have a unique language coming from domain-driven design, a ubiquitous language that explains how things are working. But language will change based on the context that we're talking. Yeah, for customer success, they are talking about a customer. Accounts will be talking about an account, but it's the same thing. But it's really important that we actually name things according to their context, because it will also prevent us reusing events. That's the worst thing you can do, reusing events, because if you do this, then there will be dependencies between systems. And when some context changes, we suddenly have the situation that we have to change 2 systems instead of only 1. So by introducing the concept of a context, the event for customer success will be trial converted. But the same event will actually be for accounts like subscription started. It's the same happening, but it's in a different context. So actually, it's a different event. The same thing has happened, but it generates 2 different events. All right. So putting all the pieces together, we have now discovered that starting with the outcome, working backwards to identify the events and the information in the system, we are actually able to drill down into the system and implement a slice of the system using event modeling. I have generated this picture in a couple of minutes from the original knowledge model, because all the information is already there. Even in the event model, we work backwards. We start with the event and just say, what pattern does this event need to implement? And everything else is already there, because I know that when I have the event with certain information, that information needs to be in the command because it needs to give it to the event. The interface will have to have the information in the command and perhaps some missing information coming in through a query, because otherwise it can't give the information to the command. So by using this approach, you are way faster in developing these models. And in the end, what's holding you back to generate code from the model? Yeah, so we actually have a low-code system here. I'm not going that far that I will generate the code. No, in my tooling, what we're doing is presenting the model towards you so that you can be responsible for your code base using templates that generate your code from my model. Yeah, and that means that that code can be in any language. I don't care. The model always represents the system, not the implementation. So, did I get the presentation outcomes that I was hoping for? Did I succeed in convincing you that, yes, we should be putting design center stage again using this approach? And did you actually get that really important aspect of what if we start at the end? We look at what we want to create. And if we then go backwards, We don't need to do all kinds of UX sessions. We actually are able to just know what we need, and we can predict if a project will be successful before we start implementing it. So we will reduce project risk because we will exclude unknown unknowns. We will reduce lead time because we don't have to do 10 reworks because we had the wrong assumptions. We already know that we're building the right thing. Thank you for listening to me. I will be available for more questions after, but I hope that you really enjoyed this and that I made you think, and that you will embrace outcome-driven knowledge modeling. Thank you.